great pleasure to welcome and greet and introduce Todd Smith for this afternoon. And Todd is the founder of the aviation pressure group Safe Landing. He was a commercial pilot and he rose to prominence after joining Extinction Rebellion, becoming one of their spokespeople and campaigning against the damage the aviation industry is inflicting on the planet. Todd achieved something very few people achieve. He grew up on a council estate and achieved becoming a pilot, and that was his big dream. And when he became involved in and informed about climate change, he gave up the job, which I guess he will talk about a bit later on. As he says himself, he didn't realize that life had other plans for him at the time. And as he worked in the climate movement for the past five years as a spokesperson to Extinction Rebellion, Todd met other climate-concerned aviation workers and then founded a community working with aviation issues called Safe Landings, as I said before. So Todd will be talking about Keep Looking Up, and I guess you got the title from that infamous film or famous film, is that right?
Indeed, yes.
Indeed, yes. And it's a great film in its own way, isn't it? Because it says so much about what we do. We look away, we avoid the issue. And I'm really looking forward to your talk, and I pass over to you now. Okay, over to you.
Okay, thanks, Christoph. Thanks so much for inviting me here to share in this space, in this moment, this collective moment, right here, right now. And I would like to set the intention during this talk to also just be as much as you can in the present moment, to feel into the space in between my words and underneath my words. And also the space in the room where you may find yourself sat here and now. Because I feel fundamentally that we have to be rooted in the present moment, and I trust that the right things will emerge from there. That said, I'm also going to be talking about the past and elements of the future whilst we're here in this digital forum. I also invite you to connect to both the human world, perhaps the house that you're sitting in, things we've created in the human sense, and also the natural world. So wherever you find yourself on this beautiful earth, and whatever sort of external weather conditions you're experiencing now, to just hold them as we navigate and go on this journey together. So yeah, I guess growing up on a council estate, my dad was a builder, and he always told me to do a job that I'd enjoy. And at 5 years old, I was invited to go to watch the air show at Southend, and yeah, I was watching the Red Arrows, which is a Royal Air Force aerobatic display team, watching these 9 aircraft fly wing to wing in close formation, and the whole of this crowd, this Essex crowd, just stopped. Even the ones outside the pub where I was, they stopped drinking for a second. There was a shared moment of awe, and everyone looked to the sky, and really that was it. That was the seed that was planted in my heart, that really sort of resonated, that, well, I thought they look like they're having a lot of fun. And of course, the Red Arrows are famous for drawing a massive heart in the sky with their smoke. And And so from that moment onwards, I set my heart on becoming a pilot. And I guess I was quite romanticized into the idea of going into a military industrial complex. They were a military display team. The films like Top Gun from Hollywood, and the idea of flying fast jets was quite an exciting prospect for me as a young boy, with all my military aircraft I used to play with, and yeah, I mean, thankfully I didn't go into the military in the end, but I quite easily could have done. When I was 12 years old, I had my very first flying lesson for my birthday. And my mum was there quizzing the instructor. How many hours do you have? Does the plane have enough fuel? And off I went. And it wasn't long after that I convinced the air cadets to let me join them a year before I was legally supposed to. So I was in the Royal Air Force Air Cadet Youth Squadron, and I was flying with Royal Air Force instructors at the age of 12 or 13 years old, doing aerobatics, and I was recommended for a flying scholarship. Strangely, I intuitively almost knew how to fly. I felt instantly at home in the air, and when I did my first loop-the-loop with this Royal Air Force instructor, on the way back down, back to level flight, we hit this bump. And the bump was the turbulence that we created as I pulled up into the loop, and he said it was a perfect loop. And of course, I'd never even done one before, so he recommended me for this flying scholarship, and I didn't, nothing much materialized of that, and I had a very sort of troublesome teenage time, and I think it's safe to say that it's true that there is suffering in the world. I was actually suicidal. I don't think I've ever shared this publicly, but yeah, 12 or 13, I was deeply depressed, and I couldn't deal with the pain, the inner pain that I was navigating at that time, to the point where I stuck a pin in a plug socket and blew myself up. And so yeah, it was dark. There was some dark moments in my early teens, and I that sort of suppressed rage, and falling away from a dream, if you like, the dream of becoming a pilot. The Royal Air Force seemed like this elite organization that were way beyond my reach, given that I was on this council estate, and kids that grew up where I grew up didn't end up as Royal Air Force pilots. That was the story that I was telling myself at the time. And so, I navigated those teenage years. I got in trouble with the police a few times. I was in the youth offending team, fell into recreational drug use. I was really just trying my best to find connection, and to find out who I was, and bounced between jobs, failed college, dropped out of university, signed up to the army, and eventually got myself onto an electrical apprenticeship. But one thing led to another, and whilst I was, I later got a job at 18 working in an office in London, and I finally looked at becoming a commercial pilot. And that was a very expensive thing to do. You need about £130,000 to become a commercial airline pilot, and I didn't have anywhere near that money. I didn't have any money. In fact, I got a loan out and did my private pilot's license. And again, I had that sense of like getting in this small two-seater aircraft and just being good at it and feeling at home in the air. And I didn't feel, at that time, I lacked a lot of self-worth. I almost needed to become a pilot just to feel accepted and valued, and so I was getting that validation, and I was in my element in the air, I made my way through flight training. 2008 recession at the time, so it was a a global financial crisis, and the airline industry had been completely hit by that. And I didn't feel like I deserved it, but I had this drive and this passion, this heart's desire that just sort of pulled me and gave me this enormous energy to strive to achieve this goal. And it took me 5 years worth of training, and then 2 years working as a flying instructor. And then finally I got my break onto the Airbus, a commercial operation based out of Iceland in Keflavik. And then later, a year later, I got a job with Thomas Cook, a UK airline, and it just felt like the weight of the world was lifted off my shoulders. You know, I had achieved that dream job. I was working towards the capitalist dream, which I'd been told would make me happy, because once you've got all the money and the material things and the holidays, you know, you just assume, oh, that's it now. And I was happy on one level. I was deeply satisfied. The job was very, very fulfilling and very purposeful. It was very satisfying, but at the same time, you know, I had this hole in my soul. I had a lot of unresolved trauma that I was running away from. I hadn't confronted, and ultimately I needed to slow down, and I was doing the opposite. I was speeding up. I was flying at close to the speed of sound. I was jetting off all around the world, and yeah, I needed to. Well, what life had in store for me was life slowed me down, because I had my medical revoked, and just before I had my medical revoked, I had gone on for the first time, a solo backpacking journey to South America. A place formerly known as Abya Yala, now known as Peru. And whilst I was in Peru, I think I'd recently stopped drinking. I was about 6 months sober, and you know, I was there in the country, and I went up. I did this Laris trek up to Machu Picchu, and on that journey through the Andes, through the mountains, I met the Quechua community who had escaped the Spanish invasion, the colonization of that land. And when I met this community, I felt this sense of peace and contentment that they had, and I couldn't make sense of it, because materially they had none of the things that I thought you needed in life to be happy. And they prayed to mountain gods. Their kids were halfway up the mountain with a pack of llamas, as the parents were down in the village, and a very simple life connected to the natural world. And yeah, making my way to Machu Picchu, I just felt the visceral energy of that sacred place that the Incas had created. And there was an opportunity whilst I was there to go to a place which had recently been so-called discovered, called Rainbow Mountain. And Rainbow Mountain is 100 meters lower than Everest Base Camp. It's really high. It's like 17,000 feet above sea level. And the reason it had been so-called discovered is because the snow had melted for the first time in living memory, and that glacial ice caps on the top of this mountain peak had revealed this beautifully colored rainbow rock formation from the minerals in the rock. And so I went up to Rainbow Mountain. We drove most of the way and walked up the summit, and I was suffering from mild hypoxia. You know, the air was so thin up there, and I'm standing there on this peak next to Rainbow Mountain, overlooking this gloriously colored Rainbow Mountain. And I couldn't help but feel how bittersweet it was that both in that moment I was seeing this beautiful mountain, but I was also aware that the reason I could see it was because the snow had melted. And the Peruvian guide that I was with explained that Peru was one of the first countries to be hit by the climate crisis. And I was like, what? And I realized later on that that was a new seed that was planted in me. I was completely unaware of climate breakdown and the climate crisis. And And I was witnessing in that moment mass tourism. There was thousands of people up and down that hill like ants, and I was one of them. And I was experiencing mass tourism and climate change firsthand. And that was in 2018 in April. And then I went into the Amazon jungle, and these are all extremely privileged things to do, of course. But that's in some paradoxical way how I really connected to Mother Earth, to Pachamama, as they say in South America. And whilst in the Amazon jungle, there was a moment where we were drifting down the Amazon River, and the guide had turned off the engine to the boat, and I'm laying back on this boat at night, looking at the Milky Way, and the Milky Way was just so close. It was like I was in and looking through the cross section of this beautiful galaxy that we're a part of, and surrounded by this visceral sound of the jungle. And I had this experience of aliveness that I'd never sensed before. I was experiencing the aliveness of Mother Earth in that moment, the aliveness of all things, and this sense of interconnection that I had not known. And you know, it's hard to go back from that. I hadn't even taken ayahuasca or anything. It was just so visceral, um, and I came back to the UK, and you know, I stayed probably in denial for a couple more years. I wanted to find the information to justify why it was still okay to fly and why my industry wasn't a big part of the problem. So I looked on Google and found all these websites that were paid for by the industry lobbies, and you know, said how much, you know, that we can continue flying because there's this sustainable aviation fuel and X, Y, and Z. And I wanted to believe that stuff, and I did for a little while. But at the same time, I was watching the rise of Extinction Rebellion happening on the periphery and really feeling a calling to be a part of it. But, you know, also recognizing that it would be career suicide. I wanted to get my medical back. I was in £100,000 worth of flight training debt to my parents. My whole family had helped me out to become a pilot, and I needed to find a way to pay them off. But what I was experiencing was eco anxiety, and I wasn't aware of it at that time. But you know, I understand now that eco anxiety lives in all of us, if not consciously. It lives below the conscious mind in the collective subconscious, and it's a perfectly healthy and rational response to an existential threat. And so that seed of eco anxiety, shortly after I got back from Peru, meant that I had my medical revoked, and I was medically grounded. And that was the first time I slowed down. My lockdown happened about 2 years before everyone else's, and I had the space to sort of study climate science. I had gut trouble. That was one of the physical manifestations, which led to me having my medical revoked initially, and I went plant-based and then later vegan, and learned about the environmental impact of our food system. And yeah, I guess like I really, some part of me desperately wanted to get back into the airlines, and after Peru as well, I'd with this new perspective, I was like flying over the Alps and looking down at the Alps, and seeing, you know, the ice caps on top, and you know, just witnessing how vulnerable they were. And you know, I guess I spent a lot of time, a lot of hours looking down at Mother Earth, and it was so obvious to me how humans are terraformed this planet, especially at night. You know, we can see our influence is everywhere. The only place I've not seen much human influence is sub-Saharan Africa, where you could be flying for an hour or two before you see any form of like human infrastructure, visibly from 40,000 feet at least. And so yeah, I sat with that denial and that conflict that was growing inside me deeper and deeper. And of course, eventually Thomas Cook went bust, who I flew for just before the pandemic. I was bitten by a tick in Richmond Park and diagnosed with Lyme disease, which has become much more prevalent due to our milder winters and warmer summers. And it was like nature is just trying to keep waking me up and really wanting me to pay attention to this, because it was serious, and I had first-hand experience of climate breakdown and ecological collapse, and I got over Lyme disease, thankfully. Thomas Cook went bust, and then a few months later we were in the midst of a global pandemic, and enough was enough for me. I could see that this was much bigger than my job title, and as much as I love flying, and I still do, our industry is having a massive impact. 80% of the world's people have never stepped foot on an aircraft, and of those people, they're disproportionately affected by climate and ecological breakdown. And the injustice of it just became more and more clear to me, the privilege of aviation. And it's not all bad, of course, it can connect the world, and families, and can be used for a force for good. And but it is, as a human, it's the most energy intensive activity per hour we can embark on, unless we're an astronaut. So I started to connect the dots. I kept looking up. I kept my open mind and my critical thinking to try and understand what was underneath the surface of the narratives we were being sold in the aviation sector, and generally on climate and ecological breakdown. And it was difficult to speak up to colleagues then, because climate denial was still a mainstream narrative. I was bullied and ostracized by my peers for sharing Guardian articles, and I think the industry felt quite threatened by the likes of Greta Thunberg, who was 16 at the time and walking the walk, sailing to New York and really setting a wonderful example. And so, yeah, during the pandemic, I coincidentally, I was on a panel, but I was watching a panel that Claire Farrell and a few people in Extinction Rebellion were hosting, and I think Donovan McCarthy said, what we need in Extinction Rebellion? We need someone like, I don't know, an airline pilot. And I was actually on the chat at the time, and I said, well, I'm an airline pilot, and what about a just transition? And Claire Farrell kind of brought me in, and we connected, and then I got put through spokesperson training, and I say that as someone who was most anxious. The most anxious part of my flight was the passenger announcement, because I had a bit of an Essex accent, and public speaking didn't come easy to me. It's taken some time to feel comfortable being here and sharing my story. But I think it's important to know what our role is in the play and to try and play it well. And the story has the power. It's something I can share. It's a story that takes on a life of its own. And so I carried on in Extinction Rebellion. I became a spokesperson. I tried to represent workers in carbon heavy industry who are a big part of this transition. And yeah, I got arrested a few times. Rightly or wrongly, it felt like the right thing to do. I think the last time I was arrested was at the Queen's Jubilee, and I laid down in front of the Queen's Guard, and it wasn't an attack at the Queen herself, more the institution of the monarchy that owns 1/6 of the land around the world. And our message was to invite them to rewild that land, rather than using it for hunting, to actually give it back to nature and the earth, and to do something. And that if they were serious about the climate and protecting Mother Earth, then surely that would be a logical thing to do. And so I'm still released under investigation for public nuisance at the Queen's Jubilee. It was a very surreal day, as I'm being dragged up Pall Mall in front of all these royalists who were shouting, "Throw him in the dungeon, take him to the Tower." And at one point I was intent on going to prison. I thought that's where I could be most effective, and I think that's right for some people, but I'm not sure that's right for me. And what happened through this process of meeting other activists is the very first Extinction Rebellion meeting I went to, I was there nervously thinking, what are these people going to think of me? I was an airline pilot wanting to get my medical back and go back into the industry, still in somewhat of the denial of the anxiety I was feeling. And it turned out the guy sat next to me, George Hibbard, was an EasyJet cadet, and he was also a pilot. Of all the places of the world, of all the meetings with Extinction Rebellion, I was sat next to the only other airline pilot at my very first meeting, and we were supposed to meet. Life brought us together because that was really the beginning of what now is Safe Landing. And that was the first time that I didn't feel alone. I was there with a colleague that understood. He had a degree in environmental science. He understood both the climate impacts and the love of the job. And we later met another pilot, Dan Tipney, who had taken voluntary redundancy in the pandemic with 2 young kids, and this group just emerged organically of aviation workers that were concerned, and we were offering support to one another and fellowship, and yeah, that later grew into what is now formally Safe Landing. It's been going for 3 or 4 years now, and we're really just trying to be a crash pad for people, I suppose, that are becoming climate aware, and so that people don't have to feel alone, so that people know that it's okay, and they can feel comfortable leaning into this collective moment that we share, which is on one level absolutely terrifying, you know, and it's compounded if you're egoically very identified with your career path. You know, it can feel like a real attack on you, and there's this polarization between the climate movement and workers in carbon heavy industry, and of course we need to find unity if we're going to navigate this effectively. And I guess, you know, looking at my own personal flaws and my own learnings, my own experience, I'm very grateful to have been in therapy for 5 years, with someone who's somewhat of an expert on eco-anxiety, and from the Climate Psychology Alliance. And you know, when I first became an activist, I guess I was there still wanting to be seen, heard, validated, and probably with my own projections of my own suffering, putting that out into the world, and you know, carrying the weight of the world on my shoulders as if it's my responsibility to save the world. And firstly, the world, in my perspective, doesn't need saving. Mother Earth is very patient, and even if all of these expressions of life don't exist, and of course everything is temporary, impermanent, then another expression of life will come. And even if that takes 100,000 years, Mother Earth is patient. She doesn't need us to save her, but I do think that we are her children, and we live in the womb of our mother, and it would be a great loss. So you know, I think the more I've slowed down in my own activism, whilst looking up, whilst having my eyes wide open to the reality of the world in which we live, whether it be the current genocides unfolding, the political landscape, or the daily crumbling of ecosystems, I now look at that in balance as much as I can. I don't over consume that information to the point that my nervous system is dysregulated, and I can't feel the joy of my own being, because I do feel fundamentally that if we want to change the world, if I want to change the world, then I have to change myself. And that's been a long lesson, and I'm still learning that. But I do feel and Gabor Mate speaks to this. I had the opportunity to ask him a question once related to eco-anxiety, and he said to me, Todd, it is true that there is suffering in the world. The question is, who are you in the face of it? And I think, you know, there's a beautiful song from a resistance choir, that the world didn't give us joy, and the world can't take it away. And I feel that the more I firstly need to deeply accept the reality of this moment, because I feel if I'm resisting what is, even as I'm speaking something right now, if I'm saying something, then it already is. So whatever it is, whatever form the moment is taking, first I need to accept it internally, because if I don't accept it and I resist, because I couldn't accept the fact that we're on a trajectory, seemingly, that our leaders are seemingly driving us towards annihilation and extinction. But I have to accept that reality first and foremost to be free of it internally. And then from that deep place of acceptance, I feel and I trust that the right action will follow. And I've not that's not an original thing from me. That's something I've learned from spending time around the wisdom tradition of Thich Nhat Hanh and Plum Village and the Zen Buddhism, listening to Eckhart Tolle, reading The Power of Now, The New Earth, listening to his wife Kim Eng, and trying as much as I can to bring, if you like, the magic into the mundane. And what is magic for me? It's being being who we are, which underneath the duality of emotions and the mind created world is a state of consciousness, a state of peace, a state of love, and a state of joy. And I turn to the natural world to help me feel into that space that we are, that I am, and I sit with trees, and I've learned to slow down, and it's not easy in this moment, or in this world, with the insanity of the world that wants to draw you in, the unconsciousness that we see on the media, and being in the media, and to slow down, and also to cultivate love for the other. And that for me is a deep practice, because I feel that when I look at Donald Trump, for instance, who I can disagree with the actions that he's taking, and not want to tolerate that, and at the same time, when he entered the fetus of his mother, I don't think he was capable of the actions that he's capable of now. And if I walked, in his shoes and grew up in the environment that he grew up in, with the trauma he experienced, and perhaps the lack of opportunities to work on that trauma, to do that inner work, then I might also act in a similar way to Donald Trump. And so on some level, I can see that it's the unconsciousness in Donald, which is inherited, it's collective, it's generational, is not necessarily who he is at the deepest level. And I feel that we need to move beyond the polarization and the othering as much as possible. And that's part of my activism, if you like, now, which is to build bridges and to find our shared values as much as possible, without feeding into the drama and creating more of a polarization. And Thich Nhat Hanh has really been an inspiration for me, given his story of navigating the depth of the Vietnam atrocities that were committed by both American and Chinese imperialists. And he speaks about having the seeds of violence, discrimination, hate, intolerance in him. And we all have those seeds, but we can all choose to water and cultivate the seeds of love, joy, peace, non-discrimination, and love. And he didn't take sides, and he also didn't join the peace movement, because he could see that people in the peace movement didn't have peace in their hearts. And for me, peace isn't a place that we get to in the future. It's a state of consciousness right now. It can only be found when, for me, in my experience, when I'm not lost in the thoughts of my mind, I'm not lost and identified with my emotional experience and my body, but I'm aware that I am aware. I become the witness. I feel into the space, both internally and externally, that I feel we are, and be that peace. And trust, but I don't know what's going to happen. I would like for us to not become extinct, but I'm also trying not to be attached to the outcome. I can only do what I can in this moment and try to honor this moment as much as I can, and trust that I think when I'm in that place, I'm connected to this interconnected web of life. There's this vast intelligence beyond my mind that will put me in the right places at the right times to speak to the right people, yeah, just to both go with the flow, but also be in partnership with life. And so far, you know, that seems to be working out. I've found a peace in me, in not all the time, but in most moments I can come back to, or I can at least return to acceptance of what is. And that enables me to share moments of joy and love and to love deeply in this moment. I think is an act of revolution in and of itself. So I'm grateful to be here. I'm grateful, even though, you know, the dream that I expected to, the life I expected to be living, is not one that I am living. I can't return to the airline industry. I've looked at it again recently. Could I return? Could I become an aerial firefighter? You know, could I do something more aligned? And I don't think there is a path back into that industry for me. I'm instead learning to fly paragliders at the moment, which is honoring the childhood dream in me to fly. And I can take off from a mountain in Wales or the South Downs or even in the Alps recently and be at one with the energy of the earth, with the thermals of the sun and the wind and the mountains, and to be in the sky, feeling at home in the vastness of that sky and that space, and to really honor that dream in a way which feels completely aligned, and I hope to offer that dream to others that still feel the calling to be in the air, and to know that flying doesn't have to cost the earth. So with that, I'm going to wrap up, and I look forward to hearing some of your questions. Thanks for inviting me once again.
Thank you, Todd. That was amazing. I was actually deeply moved hearing your story and journey into becoming a pilot and achieving that dream, and then the kind of then deciding to let that go, and then hearing you speak again about your connection to air, and just a wonderful storyteller. And I think people have been really moved and inspired by what you've shared today. There are a few, I mean, I have lots of questions, but I'll ask the ones from the chat first. Max spoke about he lives between Italy and the UK, and those connections are important. He has family there, he has work there. And he wondered about the offset policies that are given by airlines. That feels like a little bit smoke and mirrors, maybe a bit of an illusion. He also mentioned about, people often say take the trains, but they're of course very expensive. And flights these days are just so, the much cheaper option. So he's torn, he needs to make those journeys. He wonders about government supporting the train journeys and making that cheaper and easier. What's that about? And yeah, your suggestion and how he can minimize his impact in terms of those journeys.
Thank you. Yeah, beautiful, grounded questions about the reality of how do we navigate these conflicts, and when we live in a system which subsidizes the airline industry massively. Jet fuel's tax-free, and it's much more expensive to take the train. So I guess what I would say is, obviously, if you can plan in advance and to book a rail ticket earlier, then you'll probably find that it's cheaper. It's not your fault that the system is rigged that way. And I also say that, if we're flying for love or science, then fly. But I think for me, if I ever choose to fly as a passenger, I've not done it for several years now. But if I do choose to fly as a passenger, then I just make it a very conscious decision. And if I do choose consciously to take that flight, then I also honor the feelings and the understanding of that privilege, and just to feel into the guilt a little bit, you know, that but also not to feel too guilty, because it is ultimately a systemic issue. So in Safe Landing, we campaign for a frequent flyer tax levy and a jet fuel tax. You know, I've come up with a solution, an imperfect solution, because of course everything is imperfect, but I've got myself a second-hand electric car, and you know, I've driven to Florence in Italy for work, for activist related stuff, and I can take it down to the Alps and to go, you know, paragliding, and you know, it only takes a day to get to the Alps, a day and a half or two to get to Italy via electric car. And you know, I stopped at a charging point in the Swiss Alps and got to go swimming in a glacial lake. So there's many more journeys along the way when we go much slower. And I think there's just an invitation in this time to decelerate our lives in whatever way we can, because ultimately the faster we move, and flying being the pinnacle of that, the most energy we consume per hour. So yeah, just trying not to feel too guilty, but just holding the duality, and also honoring the emotional experience, if you can, if you do need to fly to see family or for work, and to just make it a conscious decision as much as possible.
Thank you. Do you know much about the offset policies? And
Oh, sorry, yeah.
yeah, no.
Yeah, I forgot that bit. Yeah, so the CEO of Delta Airlines, and I like to quote industry people on this rather than give our own perspective. The CEO of Delta Airlines himself said that offsetting is a waste of time, and the reason he said that is because if we planted a tree on every inch of the land on this planet, then we'd only offset humanity's emissions currently for 3 months, and we'd have no food or land left to live on. We'd starve. So Microsoft also offset their business flying emissions to either protect a forest or grow a forest. I think it was the former, and that forest burnt down in wildfires. So I do think we have to be very careful. The true cost of 1 ton of CO2 from, say, Italy to the UK and back, plus the non-CO2 emissions, is going to cost about $800 for our children in the future to extract that carbon from the atmosphere. So when you pay 30 or 40 pounds for a ticket, you really have to bear in mind the true cost of that we're putting on to younger generations ultimately. But again, it is a system we live in currently, and we have to try and navigate it as imperfectly as we can.
Gosh, it's enormous, isn't it? And in terms of trains, do you know much about that, trains as an alternative, and whether or why, as this is part of the question, trains aren't getting that funding or aren't supported in that way as a far more ecological solution?
Yeah, I generally feel the system is rigged. A sane system in this time would mean that the value of systems is taken into the economic market to the point where a tree has no value until you cut it down, and then you can both sell the wood plus the space you've created. You can plant a monocrop culture and grow palm oil for jet engines, for instance. So if we really valued the cost of carbon in the way that we travel, then the lowest carbon travel option would be the cheapest. But because the system currently values selling drums of oil above all else and subsidizes the airline industry significantly, I think we pay up to 50% in tax for our cars at the pumps, but it's completely tax-free for jet fuel. And the people that fly most are the people that have most money. So they're benefiting most, private jets especially. So yeah, the actually with cost of trains in the UK, I believe is I think it's only beaten by the cost of rail in Switzerland through the Alps. But it's super expensive. you can get interrailing tickets, but yeah, we need to put pressure on governments to, you know, if we could raise, I think 34 billion in Europe just by taxing jet fuel, and that we could ring fence that and put it towards public transport, making that the cheapest option. So we are pushing for policy changes, and we do need that to make the system fairer to people, that, and also incentivizing employers to give people extra holiday. If they take the low carbon option, they get an extra 2 or 3 days at the beginning or end of the holiday, and that's paid for by the company. We need to incentivize that form of travel for sure.
Yeah, thank you for such a rich and thorough answer. There are a couple of people who've been asking about mass tourism. What you thought about people going particularly to sacred sites and areas with large amounts of indigenous wisdom, and your thoughts on that?
Again, it comes back to flying for love or science, and flying consciously. And I feel, you know, what a conscious decision. For me, a conscious decision is being aware that I have thoughts, that I'm not my thoughts. When the impulse emerges in me to book that holiday to escape my inner turmoil, or, you know, we're sold this consumerist dream that we can work so hard that we feel inhuman. We're disconnected from our being, and then we're working so hard that we need to jet off to the Caribbean to have 2 weeks to become a human being again. So first and foremost, you know, looking at the reason why, the impulse why we might want to go somewhere. Are we escaping? Can we do it more locally? Is there another way? But, you know, if it feels like a heart calling, and you consciously feel into that, and there is a reason for love, and that could be working in solidarity with indigenous communities or the wisdom traditions, then take the flight. But I think it's the process, and how often, and to just honor and to really try and educate yourself as to the harm that is causing to the earth as well, so that you can, you know, bring in all of the factors in that decision making process, and honor the various elements of the process as well. So there's no right or wrong answer. I don't think for 1 second we're all just going to stop flying overnight. I am excited about the technology, some of the technology. There is a new story to tell in aviation of next generation aircraft, but unless we do less now, there won't be a future in aviation. There won't be destinations visitable that we know and love. So we need to do less now in the short to mid-term, 10 or 15 years, and then there will be electric or, say, green hydrogen aircraft, and it might take longer to get to that long-haul destination. We might need to, in the olden days, it would take 3 days to get to New Zealand because we need to take short hops, and we can and we'll be able to do that in, say, 15 years' time with these emergent technologies. But yeah, we're in this sort of lull period where we need to reduce our carbon emissions rapidly. We have no carbon budget left for aviation for a 1.5 degree world. We've already gone through that. So, and to make it more equitable, if we do less in the global north, that allows the global south to have a basic form of infrastructure, aviation infrastructure, that they rightly deserve. We are per capita one of the most countries that fly most in the world. In the UK, it's become such a part of our culture. It's like a birthright. We step on a plane without second thought. So yeah, just really making that decision conscious, and to remember the rest of the world as well that don't have access to it, and what damage that might be doing.
Yeah, it's that we're so used to moving fast and moving faster and faster and faster and faster, and so much of the lesson that we often learn is we just have to stop, slow down, pull back, draw back, and realize that there are other ways to step forward or get somewhere or make that journey of love, as you say.
Yeah.
Krista's here, so I assume I'm handing over to her.
It's usually the moment when I say we're running out of time. And Todd, I mean, I can't quite impressed how touched everybody was about your story. It might be worth it for you to stick around and just have a look through the comments. There's so much love pouring out for you. I hope you can feel it and take it. It was really, really touching. And also admirable, you know, because you needed some pushes and nudges from the universe. but it also, even if we all get the pushes and nudges, it still takes courage, doesn't it, to step out and to say, okay, I can't, no matter how much I loved it, I can't contribute it to any longer. And that is hugely admirable. And the admiration comes through, I guess, you know that. So I wanted to thank you very much for being part of this summit. We have heard from so many people and with different angles, and it's hugely appreciated. Sabi, would you agree?
Oh yes, the love is pouring through the chat. Everyone is.
Love is just pouring through this.
Yeah.
Inspirational, admirable. Thanks for your story and your presence, and so on and so on. So thank you so much. And
Thank you. Thanks everyone. Thanks for the love. I appreciate it.
good.
Thanks for the invitation. It's been wonderful
Yeah,
sharing space.
brilliant, brilliant. Okay.